Hi guys, and welcome back. Today I'm working on some more watercolor and gouache painting. I love using these two together. I say that all the time, but I've found that my process has been shifting a little bit more into favor of using gouache. It's still predominantly a watercolor, but I've found that there's more and more purposes and ways that I've used the gouache in my paintings. So let's just talk a bit about the process that I went through for this painting, and we can just chat and make some art together and hopefully have a pleasant time. But this time, this piece I went in without having any idea about the colors, which was a very risky move. Usually when I do that, it doesn't turn out well at all. I don't know why I did it this time, but I just dove into painting this one, and I'm happy with how it turned out. There were more twists and turns than I would have liked, but if I had planned it out, I'm sure I wouldn't have struggled as much with that. But overall, it didn't feel like a struggle. It just kind of felt like an exploratory process. And I kind of like doing that every once in a while to keep myself on my toes, to try out things that are a little bit different or new, mostly because I have to, because I'm just having to adjust as I'm painting it. I don't know, there's a certain amount of excitement that can come from just jumping in and starting to paint. I don't recommend it for myself. I usually am much happier with the results when I plan it out. But anyways, I jumped into this one. I tried to visualize it in my head how I kind of wanted it to come together, but it was very different by the time I got to the end. I started with painting her skin, and I wanted it to be a bit more desaturated and darker. And I find that I often mix colors that granulate weirdly when I'm not really intending to. And that's what happened with her skin. I wish I had tested these pigments out on a scrap piece of paper first. And it's okay, I am able to smooth it out with each glaze that I do on top of it, each iteration, each addition to her skin, and you can't even notice. But when I paint this first layer on her skin, it just looks so patchy. And it's not the paper's fault. Like I said, hot press paper can be a little bit more of a challenge to get really smooth washes. This was definitely the pigment. I could feel that the pigments were really wanting to separate on me very quickly, and yeah, they did that. so that was a lesson to just make sure that if I'm using different new paints and pigments, that I need to do a little test swatch before I actually put it on the final piece. And this little painting is available at my shop. It's titled The Flower. So if you'd like to give her a new home, there's a link down in the description that'll take you over there. And she's actually one of the sticker designs for Patreon for this month. So if you'd like to get one of her and 2 more stickers, then make sure to sign up for either the sticker pack tier or the print tier by the end of October. And there's that link down in the description that'll take you over to my Patreon. So usually the process that I've had lately is I will paint the shape that I'm painting. I'll paint, say, for example, the skin. I'll paint the base layer and the shadows, and I'll get it like mostly there, probably 80-90% there. And then I'll pull out some of my darker gouache paints and use those to really darken the deepest areas, the cast shadow areas, inside of the ears, right underneath the chin, areas like that where they're deepest, darkest shadows of the skin or the shape or whatever I'm painting will be. I found that with the gouache, the acrylic gouache that I'm using, I'm really actually very happy with how the dark colors are very, very smooth. They don't granulate. They're different from watercolors, and the pigments, I guess, just build up differently. So I find that I'm able to control them better. I don't get a certain graininess that many of my dark watercolors have, especially when I need to have a lot of pigment to get the depth of color that I want. So I found that this is a really happy solution for me, is to use my acrylic gouache and I just water it down just like if I were using watercolor right out of the tube, and then I can get these really rich shadows. So that's usually what I do, but with this piece I ended up going to the gouache that I have much sooner. I actually did almost all of the shadows on her face and her skin with a gouache, and I actually picked just a straight black, which seems like an odd choice, but I actually really liked it. It did make her skin super monochromatic. It ended up being basically black and gray kind of, rather than more of a color. But that was kind of interesting. I enjoyed playing with that, with an area of the painting that was so desaturated. I don't do that as often as I would like outside of doing like true black shapes in my painting. So that was kind of a happy accident where it was not intentional to be so stripped and void of color by the time I was done with it, but I liked it. I did end up going back in and adding a few more areas to have a little bit more color in her skin, like a little bit more in some of the shadows and a little bit more red under her eyes. But overall, I actually kept it pretty monochromatic. During the painting process of this piece, I ran into quite the issue. I have this embossing gun that I use that it's used for crafts and embossing things, but it's my go-to tool for drying out watercolors. I use it in every single painting that I do through the entire process. I absolutely love it. I love it way more than like a hair dryer. I know a lot of people use those. Hair dryers, I find they blow a lot. So if I have a pool of water on my painting and I don't necessarily want it to move somewhere else and shift, if I were to use something like a hair dryer, it would push the paint and completely change how the pigments settle. And they're a lot bigger and a lot noisier, but the embossing guns are really small. They are much hotter, I've found, and they don't have as much force behind the air, so it dries the watercolor really quickly and just kind of locks it down where it is. And I love it. And it died on me, mine did, while I was working on this piece. And you don't really realize how much you rely on a tool until it's just gone and you take it for granted. But yeah, I found that there were a lot of areas, like when I was painting her hair, I'd have to do the more traditional approach where you would paint something and then have to go to another area that's not touching that at all so that you wouldn't run the risk of them bleeding together. And then I'd have to wait for that area to dry before I could repaint it or paint on top of it. And that actually really threw a wrench in the flow of this piece. I found that it was a lot more frustrating to work on when I had to break away from an area that I was just really focused on, and I wanted to keep refining. I wanted to add the shadows and the details, and I couldn't, when normally I'd be able to just reach for that tool, dry it out, and just keep working in that area until it was built up and refined the way that I wanted. So this is just a good reminder to make sure that all of my tools are in order. I'm of course gonna go get a new one as quickly as possible. That way I don't have to fuss with this, but it's just interesting how much it does throw a wrench in the work process when you have a tool that you love and it's just taken away. But yeah, I had to jump around a lot without that heat gun, so I'm excited to get a new one and get back to a more efficient approach. I think that was the biggest thing, is that it felt very inefficient as I was hopping around from one area to the next and trying to juggle different phases of the painting within the same area. So like some parts of her hair only had the first wash down, and then others were a little bit more defined, but I couldn't define them completely yet. And anyways, it was just inefficient, and I don't like that. I like being efficient with my painting. And don't forget, the original painting, The Flower, is available at my shop. There's a link down in the description if you'd like to go check that out. And I do have my Inktober book from last year that is officially available at my shop. So if you'd like to get that and you missed out on the Kickstarter last year, then that is also the link down below. And I have a link to my Patreon as well. Thank you to all of my amazing patrons over on Patreon. I cannot thank you guys enough. Again, this piece will be the sticker for this month, one of the stickers. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.